3 weeks, so then they had to bring somebody in to replace them. But their lives were changed by this experience. Plus, they often stayed in the town where they worked in a Harvey house, and they often did marry there. And they're the ones who taught Sunday school classes, had quilting bees, put those together. One lady in Slayton, Texas, at the Harvey house there, taught art lessons and was known for years because of all the children that she taught art to. And she came from Kansas and made a big difference in that little Texas town. Early on, most of the women were recruited through women's magazines and newspapers in the Northwest and Midwest. Some young women left the farm for the first time to be a Harvey Girl. Others saw the employment as a way to further their education. And there are stories in the New Mexico book, and I wish I could remember her name, or I had written it down here, but a woman who in her later years became an archaeologist and had an impact on a certain part of the New Mexico archaeology community and things that she discovered and documented that no one else had. As far as the women who left the farm, many of them were the first person in their family to go further than walking distance from their home. And as I was actually writing the Kansas book, this thought came to me while I was reading about these women, that most of the farm women, when they became a Harvey Girl, that was probably the first time that they were encouraged to be feminine. And their hair had to be neat, and their clothes had to be perfect. And I also believe that for many of them, it was the first time they had a mirror in their bedroom. So it changed their lives in so many ways, other than the fact that they were able to have a good paying job at a time when women did not have that opportunity that much. Most Harvey Girls would go to Kansas City and later also to Chicago, have a personal interview, and they were often hired on the spot and put on a train either later that day or the next morning to go somewhere to work as a Harvey Girl. Their uniforms were provided, and they also had laundry service. They put their uniforms in a crate on the train. There were laundry facilities in Albuquerque, Newton, Kansas, and Temple, Texas, maybe others. Those are the 3 I know of. And in a couple of days, those uniforms would come back, and one Harvey Girl said, you know, they came back and they were clean and starched, and all I had to do was iron. And I felt like I was living in the lap of luxury. And I don't know how hard it would be to iron those uniforms with not an electric iron, for sure. But it was a luxurious way of life for a lot of them. The differences in uniforms, and this is another thing I've learned, that there were some hard and fast rules, but depending on where the Harvey house was and who the manager was, a lot of those things were fluid. They changed from location to location. So we can't say they always wore black with a white apron, because they didn't. That was a common weekday uniform, and in some locations on Sunday they wore all white. In other places they wore black and white in the lunchroom, but if they worked in the dining room they wore all white. And of course in New Mexico, Harvey Girls often wore brightly colored tiered skirts with the white, roughly peasant blouse for special celebrations, and of course at La Fonda in the patio dining room and also in the Mexican room. Okay, I'm going to have to skip some of this. There's just not enough time. It's a common thought that most of these women came west to get a husband. And that probably was true a lot of the time. But you got to remember, these were educated women. They were women of good character. Those were part of the criteria that they were looking for. Women that they could trust in these remote areas, not to go crazy, although there were thieves. And we'll read about someone else here in a minute that it's a letter that her roommate wrote that paints a little bit different portrait of a Harvey Girl. I wonder if we could open a door, or it seems really warm in here to me. Thank you. Harvey Girls, as I said, however, though, were probably a little more discriminating than they're portrayed sometimes. A former Harvey Girl recalled her engagement to a Santa Fe engineer. The couple had the Harvey House manager's approval, and the relationship seemed headed to the altar, until the prospective groom grew a mustache. The young woman did not like kissing a man with facial hair, so she told her fiancé that she wouldn't marry him unless he shaved. Well, he didn't, and she didn't. But she did marry later. She found her a smooth-faced man. All right, these are the, I call them Destination Harvey hotels in the book. The Casteneda in Las Vegas is in restoration now. Grand Corvera in Clovis has been abandoned. La Fonda, of course, in Santa Fe is thriving. Montezuma in Las Vegas is the home of the United World College campus now. And gone but not forgotten is the Alvarado in Albuquerque, El Navajo in Gallup, and El Ortiz in Deming. The quote here, Harvey Girl, Opal Sales Kill, she had a 45-year career with the Harvey House system and ended her Harvey Girl career at the Alvarado as a cashier in the coffee shop. She worked in 10 different Harvey establishments, beginning in the red brick Harvey House in Amarillo, Texas. And this is a quote from Opal Sales. In 1970, when they tore down the Alvarado Hotel, I went and watched. I cried and cried. I felt ashamed of myself until I looked around and saw other people doing the same thing. And that was a sad day. The building was built in 1902 at a cost of $200,000, and then it was demolished in 1970 after local residents were unable to raise the $1.5 million the railroad was asking for the empty building. It was usual business practice for Fred Harvey to hire European chefs to work in the Harvey houses. And there are many funny stories. If you ever have a chance to see my play, which is hilarious, by the way, we have a German chef in it, and he's always yelling in the kitchen because evidently they were hot-tempered, and of course they were also cooking for up to 50 or 60 people and having to feed them in 20 minutes, and most of the time their stove was fueled with coal. So, you know, they had a pretty demanding job. There are a lot of stories that they brewed beer in their bathtubs, and there was lots of partying on their end of the hall in the Harvey house when they lived on the premises. I don't know that John Frieden ever made beer in his bathtub, but he was trained at resorts in Italy, France, and Germany, and a relative of his was a Harvey employee, and his job was to recruit chefs and bakers to come to the United States to work for Fred Harvey. So John was assured a job when he got to the United States. He worked in Chicago's Union Station and also in Cleveland. And then in '51, he was transferred to the Alvarado, and then later worked at La Fonda until 1962. He once described Harvey Girls as beautiful, high-class women. And he said they weren't supposed to date Harvey employees, but they did. Yes, I think so, Chef Frieden, because this little lady, I knew I was going to do that. This little lady right here is John Frieden's wife. And she was a Harvey Girl at the Alvarado, and they met there and married in 1954. Is this still working? So his wife's name was Pauline, and she remembers that her pay was 25 cents an hour plus tips as a Harvey Girl. Now, chefs were generally paid $5,000 a year to work, and of course we always hear that the room and board was always included. However, Pauline says that when she was at the Alvarado until she married and moved out, that she had to pay $10 a month for her room and board. So that's another example of how things were different at different times and in different locations. The Casteneda in Las Vegas was completed in January of 1899. The building originally cost $110,000 and the furnishings were an additional $30,000. And of course the Casteneda has that beautiful courtyard that opens to the track. And the dining room there seated 108 and the lunchroom seated 50. Recently, as most of you have probably heard, the Casteneda has been purchased by a group who also bought and restored the La Posada in Winslow. And work has commenced on that building, and plans are to have a portion of the building open next year. Now I want to, I want to read you a letter that a Harvey Girl wrote in 1907. And this is wonderful. And Kathy, tell me the name of the Las Vegas community. What is the group that you're with?
The Citizens Committee for Historic Preservation.
Okay. Did y'all get that? I never can.
Las Vegas Citizens Committee for Historic Preservation.
They had this letter in their archives. A family member had donated some things, and it was great because it was in the woman's handwriting, which is always special. So Belle Ruthven and her sister Elsie had come to the Casteneda as Harvey Girls. So this is the letter she's writing to her mother. Her parents lived in Colorado. This is after supper. There has been a good many townspeople in for dinner and supper today. I have been a little out of sorts. Nothing seems to go right. I wish I wasn't here, but I am. It isn't very often that I get blue, but today I am. Elsie is taking a little walk with Jim, so I'm here alone, except for our new roommate, Agnes. How we dislike her. She curses and drinks and is absolutely no good. That's really not the usual portrait we hear of her. She is selfish as she can be. She has been our roommate almost all the time we have been here, so we are so glad that she is leaving soon. We've been away from home a long time, and it's hard to write about some things, but just the same, I have something to begin on right now. It isn't about myself, but about Elsie. I told you about their caring for each other in my last letter, Jim and Elsie. Well, that boy is a good boy with a strong will and good principles. He has promised Elsie never to touch liquor or smoke or swear, and he doesn't. He's a pretty good guy, isn't he? He is good-natured, fine-looking, and thinks Elsie is all there is. They are both very sensible. He doesn't spend his money, but this is the point. I'm very worried. There is going to be a masquerade dance by the townspeople to celebrate Washington's birthday, and Elsie kind of wants to go. We don't go to dances. I have been talking to her about it. Jim doesn't dance and doesn't care much about it. But if he should go and have a mask on, you see, they wouldn't know him, and he might learn. And when he has promised so much to Elsie, she ought not to put temptation in his way, ought she? So here's this wonderful husband material, and the older sister's afraid that Elsie's going to corrupt him at the masquerade dance. I just think that's correct. You know, we all have our worries. It doesn't matter what time we live in, we all have our worries. mother from Colorado. 4 months later, there's this letter from the mother to the girls. My dear children, we received your letters on Tuesday and we welcome them. Well, we have been watching for a letter saying you are coming home, and still you have not come. Now I think you better come home, don't you? I wish that there was a way to make them give you your passes, because Harvey employees had train passes and they could ride for free. I think they played a mean trick on you. Now do accept Papa's offer and come home at once. Now another thing. Sew your money in a stout muslin bag and sew the bag to the inside of your corsets at the top front. Only save out a little change for what you will need on the way home. You have worked too hard for that money to let someone run away with your satchel or pick your pocket. I must close now, hoping we will see you next week. As ever, your loving mother. A week later, another letter from Mother to Belle and Elsie. A very short letter. My dear children, I am getting up a party to go to the mountains. Now do not disappoint us. Let us know when you will be home, what day and what train. Affectionately, Mama. So this tells us how parents worried about the girls, even though there was such a good reputation for the Harvey employees, they still worried about them, of course. And then there's those dangerous dances that they were doing. And you just can't protect yourself. Ethel Irby was born 16 miles northwest of Raton in brilliant New Mexico. And after graduating from high school, she went to work at the Casteneda in Las Vegas, and this was in 1928. Her daughter told me that she could see the Harvey Girl experience in her mother and the way she lived her life. That in her work ethic, in the way she kept herself in her home, the way she folded clothes and polished silver, and the way she treated everyone she met. And this is a sad little story, but it also tells us what these girls experienced. One Christmas, when Ethel was working in Las Vegas, she was very homesick. And as we women often do, she decided to go shopping to lift her spirits before her shift started. So she found some pretty shoes, bought them, and continued walking down the street doing some window shopping, and it began to rain. And before she could get back to the Casteneda, her shoes fell apart. And she said she had never felt so lonely in her life. But it was time for her shift, so she put on her uniform and went to work. How many of you have seen the Harvey Girl movie? Well, it comes around often on a classic movie channel. You can buy it on Amazon, and it's worth watching, I think. It's a lot of fun. I'm just going to quickly tell you some facts about the movie that I found interesting and helped me enjoy it even more. It was set in a fictitious town in New Mexico, and the name of that town was Sandrock, but it was all filmed on a soundstage in California. The set design was modeled after some elements of the Casteneda's exterior, and also in the dining room. There's a balcony featured in one of the musical numbers that is supposed to be a very close replica to a second-story balcony of the Casteneda. What balcony? Would that be the one out the back that faces the tracks? Yeah. It's a very small balcony. I think they made it larger to accommodate the dancing girls. And apparently, at least for a time, there was a saloon directly across the street from the Casteneda. And then, of course, in the movie, the Alhambra, the saloon is across from the Harvey house. The song on the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe won an Academy Award that year for Johnny Mercer, the songwriter. It was declared one of the top movies of 1946, and its gross earnings was $1.2 million that year. It was a real challenge to make this movie and it be the Hollywood spectacle that they wanted, and also meet the standards of the Harvey Company because they were very worried about how the Harvey Girls would be portrayed, and then of course how their company, how their reputation would show. There was lots of correspondence between Byron Harvey, who was Fred's younger son, who at this time was the president of the company. And in one letter, and these are letters I read at the Klein Library, he said that he was very worried because on the movie poster, the word Harvey Girl was too close to Angela Lansbury's bare leg. And he thought that this was telling him, sending the wrong message. So he was assured by the head of MGM Publicity, who was one slick guy, if you could read his letters, this guy could sell anything, I think. And so he assured Byron that the advanced advertising would make it very clear that the Harvey Girls were not burlesque queens. And to appease the Harvey Company and the family, Fred Harvey's grandson, Byron Harvey Jr., was given a little bit part as a Santa Fe brakeman in the movie, and he was also listed as a technical advisor, so I don't know how much influence he had. Then we go to the El Navajo in Gallup, and I love this quote. Ella Mae Arthur, she went to work there when she was 16 years old, and she took a nap and didn't wake up and miss seeing Elvis come through. So, and that was a common story. A lot of these larger hotel celebrities, especially at La Fonda and the Alvarado, and the El Ortiz in Deming, a lot of celebrities came through and stayed. The employees, of course, had to act like they didn't recognize them. They had a lot of fun with that. This was built in 1923, and it replaced, as I mentioned earlier, an earlier Harvey house that had been built in 1895. And this was designed by Mary Coulter, and the name of the architecture was a tribute to the Navajo Native Americans, whose reservation, of course, is just very near Gallup. Just quickly, the standard meals. This is from a Navajo menu, but oh, you're kidding.
It's okay, just keep going.
People have places to go with me. All right. It's 20 to 1? Oh, okay. Well, okay, here's the Navajo. I love these pictures. In this one up here, these are all people who worked at the Navajo. And don't you just love the guy in this picture? He was a pantry boy, and he was one cool guy, wasn't he? And there with those Harvey Girls. And then, evidently it was pretty common. You see the girls, they're on top of the Harvey house, playing their guitars and posing for pictures. Now, the family that gave these to me, up there, National Guard came into Gallup because there was a coal miners' strike, and they came to keep the peace, and the Harvey Girls kind of probably were their tour guides, don't you think? This family, on Flickr, I could look at some photos and choose the ones I wanted. And another on top of the roof was the grandmother in her lacy underwear with a mirror posing for these pictures. But you know, the family would not release that for the book. And I thought it would just be really good, really good. Okay, then we have El Ortiz, which was very small. It had between 8 to 11 rooms at Deming. Several movies were made there. Oh, Grand Provera in Clovis. These images are the hand-tinted, most of them are hand-tinted, picture postcards that the Fred Harvey Company produced and sold. And they were very popular. I was so fortunate to discover a collector, Michael McMillan, who lives in California. And he makes his postcards available to me for these books. So I'm very fortunate for that. Oh, it's not clicking anymore. It's, well, okay. You do know you have twin Harvey Girls right here in Santa Fe who worked at La Fonda. when they graduated from high school in Minnesota, and their daddy bought them a car, and they came to Santa Fe, and they left. And they're great. I had a wonderful afternoon with them. All right, well, I'm going to, you know what? You're just going to have to buy the book. How about that? Maybe that's a good way to sell more books. Let's just stop right in the middle. Before I close, there are two things. One, I want to say quickly. Please, if you're not already, record your family history. It's just so, it's all we have to tell these stories. Not about Fred Harvey, but any family has history. And we need to record it and make it available to other people, donate it to a library or a museum so that researchers can use it. And people, these institutions want this information. So be proud of your family history and please record it. I'm going to quickly now tell you the story of my grandparents and what got me started on this path. My grandmother, Elizabeth Gertrude McCormick, was an orphan and grew up in Philadelphia and was a nurse, was working as a nurse. And she decided that she was going to go to Alaska. And I would love to know why. But that was her dream, was to go to Alaska. So she decided she would be a Harvey Girl and she could work her way up through to California, and that would get her closer. She went to Kansas City, had a personal interview, was hired, and was sent to Raton, New Mexico immediately. Real hot spot, wasn't it? I think there were like 14 stools in the lunchroom, and very, very small place. But she loved being a Harvey Girl, evidently, and was working her way to Alaska. My grandfather is from the island of Mauritius, and when he was, okay, thank you. Oh, really? Good. When he was 12, he ran away from home and started working on a whaling ship. And when he was 28, he left the ship in Veracruz, Mexico with his friend Tom, and they decided they were going to walk to California. So, guess how far they got? Raton, New Mexico. They ran out of money, so they got a job with the Santa Fe, and that's where my grandparents met. And they married 3 months later because, let me tell you, this was one good-looking Frenchman that walked into that little Harvey house. And so I think my grandmother must have been a little more proactive maybe than the other 4 Harvey girls that were there. So they married 3 months later and lived the rest of their lives in Albuquerque and raised their family. And I just have so much more to tell you. Everett Apodaca is here. His quotes are in the book, and he talks about the Montezuma in Las Vegas and how when he was even in junior high, he had an appreciation for the building. And you know, it's that kind of interest in this history and in these buildings that has caused a little resurgence here, as well as will continue this history through to other generations. So, I'm sorry I couldn't tell you everything. I just heard that, which of the twins is your neighbor?
Beverly.
Beverly is Tomas's neighbor, one of the twin Harvey girls, so he can probably tell you more about them.
Show us some more slides at least.
Sure, we can go through these. Let's see what we've got here. There's LaFonda. I'm going to go back a bit. There's a staff. The Harvey company had a professional photographer on staff that went around and took all these pictures. Okay, so now I'm going to go this way. Real quick, there's a twin. And in this fun, there were twin guests at LaFonda. So they took their picture, and they didn't even get their names. Aren't they cute? Of course, they married really, they had wonderful marriages. So. Las Cruces only had a newsstand. This is a Harvey Girl. Actually, that's a Gallup newsstand, but it's a good shot of it. And of course, they sold magazines and newspapers and books there. These were smaller hotels. They were never used like the larger. They were not a destination hotel. Although although Charles Lindbergh did stay in Vaughn at that one, because he had to land his plane in Atlanta. And then Belen, if you've not been to the Belen Harvey House, they have a wonderful museum there, good exhibits. Meredith is wearing one of their t-shirts that has the Harvey Girls with the little being cute there. And then these are the lesser Harvey houses, I guess, for lack of good description. The Raton Harvey House actually closed, it appears to be like within a year after it opened, because there was this boom, and then because of the larger Harvey houses that developed, it just didn't have the business anymore. And then my ending is that Harvey Girls may not have danced and sung as much as Judy Garland did in the movie, but they worked hard, had fun, and made Fred Harvey proud. And we are also proud for all of their contributions to the history of New Mexico, because there's so much they did that we would never know. Thank you. I do want to mention two things real quick, and then I promise there will be no more milking for applause. If you want to keep up with Fred Harvey events and things, Kathy Weir has a Facebook page, although it didn't appear many of you are very active on Facebook. It's Fred Harvey Mary Coulter Fan Club Facebook page. And then if you're interested in touring the Casteneda and the Montezuma in Las Vegas, we have Kathy Hendrickson here, and she is the owner and operator of the Southwest Detours, and she does tours, and you can just get in touch with her and she'll set that up for you. She also includes the Plaza Hotel, which is not a Harvey House. And are you going to do the ghost one? Have you decided?
Oh, I don't know.
I want to go in the basement.
We have some Harvey Girls. I don't have my uniform on today, but I'm an Indian detour courier. We haven't decided if we're going to go in the basement yet. If you've watched the Ghost Adventures series,
Yes.
they did a Ghost Adventures in the Casteneda Hotel and the Plaza, and it kind of scared us. I don't think we want to go down.
So you can do
But
it.
we do a nice full tour of the Casteneda Hotel, and it's amazing.
And of course, you can book a tour at the Montezuma. The students do tours on a limited basis, but Kathy can book it for you, not anytime, but she has a little more flexibility. So quickly, and if anyone needs to leave, I see my best friend already walked out on me. She must be hungry. No, she had to make a phone call. Yes, questions?
Yes, you started to mention typical meals that were served, and since they were European chefs, what exactly?
Well, they were
might
European chefs, but they cooked American food. You could get steak and chicken, and I think what I had listed here was a pork loin. They had sandwiches. A fried egg sandwich was 15 cents. Peanut butter and jelly was like 20 cents. So you had a good menu to choose from. The menus were dictated from the home office, so that if someone was traveling across country on the train, you could eat at Harvey houses and you wouldn't have the same meals at each place. But they typically a large meal, which included an entree and vegetables, was 75 cents. And that lasted for a long time. They kept the price of the meals down. Any other questions? Yes?
Which ones in New Mexico did Mary Coulter design?
Well, the Alvarado, the Ortiz, the building design was Louis Curtis, who was a Kansas architect that did several Santa Fe buildings. She did the interior of Ortiz. Kathy, help me here. Mary Coulter designed in, well, of course, the Fonda. And all of her charm is still so obvious at La Fonda. It's just a showcase of her work, and they've done such a good job of preserving it. Well, she asked about New Mexico. Yeah, I think that's pretty much in New Mexico. Yeah. Yes, Becky.
How were Harvey Girls recruited?
How were they recruited? There were ads that were put in like Collier's magazine and such in the Northeast. But as the towns developed a little more along the railroad, they hired a lot more local people, and especially in New Mexico, I found that to be true. And sometimes like an aunt would live in Albuquerque and her niece would be in Illinois, and she'd say, we're coming down here and working. So there was a lot of word of mouth also. Yes, ma'am?
Was it a high school graduation required?
No, that probably was one of the original requirements, but quite a few women, even that I either interviewed or heard from their families, lied about their age and went to work at like 15, and they had not. No, there were no educational requirements. Mostly they wanted ladies. And this Opal Sales that worked for the Harveys for 45 years, when she went for her interview, the man said, you're the first young woman that's come in today that wasn't chewing gum. You're hired. And they didn't want experienced waitresses because they wanted to train them. Yes, ma'am.
Where is Rincon?
Where is Rincon? It is in kind of southwestern New Mexico, no more in the central. It's just a little north of Las Cruces. Am I right, Captain? Yeah. Kind of by Hatch, Las Cruces. Yes.
Yes, in the exhibit, it showed that they were Native American and Spanish women that were hired. Could you speak a little bit about that? Or no?
Okay, were they hired?
They were. According to the exhibit, it showed Native American and Spanish women hired as
Yes.
waitresses.
Yes, and that I believe that was true, probably even more than we originally thought. And I go back again, and you think about if you're the Harvey House manager in Gallup, New Mexico, and 3 of your girls just got married, and another one got homesick and went back home, you've got to have a staff. And they began to hire locals. Edna Ortiz, and it was a funny story, again, you'll have to read it in the book. A Hispanic young girl that was hired in Clovis and worked there, and a lot of her co-workers were Hispanic. So, and there's stories of a Japanese bellboy in, I believe that was Clovis. So I think there was more of an ethnic mix than what I originally thought. Yes?
This may be legend part of it, but I'm a professional artist and I did an oil painting of a pond that is close to Montezuma's castle in Las Vegas. And the story that I was told was, in the winter when that pond was frozen, they would take ice out of it for the Casteneda, for the restaurant. Do you know anything about that?
Mace?
Well, the pond is there, and there was an ice supply there, so that all the ice was delivered into town for not just for the restaurants and hotels, but for residents too.
Okay.
So they cut block ice so that is there.
That's
not just
Oh, that's so good, so you don't just change your story.
Yeah.
Whoever you sold that painting to, you don't have to get in touch with them and say, oh, you know that story I made up? Still. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Were there a lot of satellite hotels to the Harvey houses? The reason I'm asking this is because I came across some information that there was a small Harvey house at 3A Cliff Buildings at one time. And I was wondering if there were a lot of these little satellite ones, because I was always told before that Orlando was the only Harvey house that was not built by a railroad track.
Well, of course, Montezuma was not built by a railroad track either, because they had to build a spur from Las Vegas to Montezuma. I don't know much about that, because that does pop up in my research, that there were these smaller, and it makes sense that there was.
Did these cars take them to the satellite
See,
ones?
that's what would happen. But really, that one is the only specific one that I've ever heard of. But again, they may have set up one somewhere and it didn't work, or they couldn't get staff. And now there are lots of stories, because I hear them, that my grandmother worked at Harvey House and they named some little town, and there was not a Harvey House there. The list that I went by was what I found at the Klein Library, and it was a typed list by a secretary in the Fred Harvey. So that's kind of my go-to list. But what happened is if there was a cafe close to the track, a lot of local people just called it a Harvey House. Yeah. So it may or may not have been. Yes?
Did you say you were adopted and your grandmother was adopted?
I was adopted. My grandmother was raised an orphan. There's a book in that somewhere in there. Yeah, there might be. But she raised 3 really strong, good boys, and they had a good life, except that neither of my grandparents knew how to ride a bicycle. And so their sons, that was always their lament, that nobody could teach them how to ride a bicycle. Yes?
Now, did the Harvey houses just decline from lack of business? Or did they go into a different line and get absorbed by somebody else? Or?
Well, in '68, they were bought by the AMFAC Corporation. The Fred Harvey Company was in existence until then. But as I mentioned, it was a combination of things. The trains weren't having to stop every 100 miles. The dining cars were developing, and that was better service. So people didn't have to get off the train to get a good meal. The Depression had affected them, because many of them closed in that mid to late 30s, early 40s period. However, during World War II, they reopened many of them because of the troop trains. And they would feed 400 to 500 soldiers. The train would stop. And a lot of the Harvey employees came back to work. It was hard on them because they couldn't maintain that Harvey standard. And with food rationing, of course, the meals weren't as good. But that actually was an economic boon to the Fred Harvey Company because they didn't give those meals away. And they also fed prisoners of war. Trains would stop. And then more people were beginning to buy automobiles and travel a little more by car. So it was a combination of things.
Now, were there some restaurants in airports?
I know there was in Albuquerque.
That's
Yes.
what I was thinking.
Yeah. And then the chef Brendan that I mentioned, he and Pauline went to California, and Fred Harvey Company actually did custom meal preparation, and they worked at McDonnell Douglas. So the Fred Harvey Company would install these big cafeterias and feed employees for these large companies. Yeah. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Thank you. The gift shop does have books.